graduated from the San Diego Museum of Art Docent Training Program in 2016 and is a proud member of our SDCHM Board of Directors since 2020. Our discussant today is Lily Birmingham, who is retired from her career as a program manager and engineer at Lockheed Martin, and she's been a docent at the museum, San Diego Museum of Art since 2011. She serves as our docent training coordinator here at the San Diego Chinese Historical Museum and is also a current member of our board where she serves as treasurer. Now, before we get started, I just want to note a point of housekeeping. Our talk uses software to translate Chinese subtitles. We're told it works well unless an English speaker tries to speak Chinese, which apparently confuses the software. But now, without any further ado, I introduce today's lecturer, Bob Stein.
Well, I want to thank you very much, Cinta, and thanks to you, Dan, and thanks to Lily. And this is going to prove to be, I think, fun. And as we've mentioned, it's one in a number that we've put on between the Chinese Cultural Center and the San Diego Chinese Historical Museum since 2021, involving different topics related to Jewish people in China. And we'll all remember Esther Schifrin, who I think is here today listening, and we're happy to talk to her afterwards, talking about her family's experience over 100 years living in Shanghai. And then we also had, all the way from Germany, we had Stephen Less talking about his dad, who was a graphic artist and who left Europe, escaped the Holocaust to Shanghai, where he did a whole bunch of drawings and paintings, which Stephen showed us. And then his father successfully worked as an illustrator for Bamberger's department store in New Jersey. And we did a bunch of others. And I myself spoke about the ancient Kaifeng Jewish community and Kaduri and Sassoon families. And today is something different. It's about individual Jewish people in the 20th century China and their impact and why they got there. And the reason I'm doing this, the reason my interest was piqued was when I realized that David Marshall, the inaugural chief minister of Singapore in the 1950s, was Jewish. And I wondered how that came about, and I wondered whether there was other Jewish presence in China and Asia in the 20th century. Hence this talk. Next slide, please. So when you think of Jewish presence in China, what comes to your mind? Maybe nothing. Maybe you think of the ancient Kaifeng Jewish community, which is virtually gone. I mean, there's very little trace of a little bit. Certain surnames are typical. Is it the famous Chinese rescue of 23,000 European Jews from the Holocaust to the safety of a Shanghai neighborhood? Is it the Kaduri and Sassoon families? That's part of the talk I gave in 2022. Today, we're going to recap the above for just 2 or 3 minutes, and then we're going to discuss these individuals who seem to have made a difference and why they did what they did. So if we could have the next slide. So the beginning of the 20th century was a time of tumult. It was the World War I. It was governments changing. The Austro-Hungarian Empire was dissolving. It's actually where my father was born in 124 years ago, believe it or not. And it involved Russia abandoning the czars and developing a new form of government, and China and so forth and so on. And so the fact that Jewish people would be part of this is not necessarily surprising, since they had prejudice and deprivations throughout Europe and they were living in Europe. And they were hoping that these new governments would be more, and these new systems of government would be a little more favorable to them. But then China, why China? And there's very little sizable Jewish community in China. The Kaifeng community, as I mentioned, is basically non-existent at this time. And the Sassoons and the Kaduris were not even slightly interested in any revolution. They were more than comfortable in the system that was existing at the time. It turns out that there's unique reasons for each person. They all had different reasons. Some coincidentally, some were sent by the U.S. Army and they stayed afterwards. One person got sent to the wrong language school, and next thing you know, spent his life in China. And after the little recap, we're going to talk about the most interesting one. So if I could have the next slide. So this is just to quickly mention Kaifeng, this area in central China. And on the left is a street, on the right is a drawing of a synagogue. And there's little remnants left in Kaifeng even today, but not a lot more than that. Next slide. The Sassoon family originally came from Baghdad through India into Mumbai, and the caption has a couple of the original generations, with the guy on the right improbably named Sassoon Sassoon. And they built docks and owned silk mills, cotton weaving, and steamships. And they soon decided they could ship stuff from India to China. And the next slide. And as you can see, they were pretty successful in integrating themselves into British society. This is one of many paintings that John Singer Sargent, the most famous portrait artist of the time, painted of one of the Sassoons. He painted a bunch of them. He charged in those days $5,000, which around 1900 was like a fortune. And he was secretary to Field Marshal Sir Douglas Haig in World War I. And there were a bunch of other Sassoons. Next slide. This is the Sassoon House, which is now on the Bund in Shanghai and is now a part of the Peace Hotel that's been renamed. Um, and I want to mention Sir Percival David, who, if you've ever been to the British Museum, there is a Chinese ceramic collection of Sir Percival's there, which he just recently donated entirely to the British Museum, worth probably $1 billion. And he was one of the Sassoons as well. Next slide. And here's a picture of some of the Kadoories, Sir Ellie Kadoorie and Lord Lawrence Kadoorie and Sir Horace Kadoorie. And they were also fixtures. Let's have another slide. We talked about this a couple of years ago. I'm just going to go through this for a second. They built this mansion called the Marble Hall, and there's Ellie Kadoorie at the Marble Hall at the Chinese Medical Association meeting. And if I could have the next slide. And here it is. Here's the Marble Hall, which still exists today in China. However, if you look at the next slide, it's now called the Children's Palace. And there is none other than Zhou Enlai leading children at the Children's Palace. And next slide. And here's another picture of the of Marble Hall again. So this is the Kadoorie family, and they to this day own the Peninsular Hotel chain, and they're major owners of China Power and Light of Hong Kong. And if we could have the next slide. And then I'm just going to mention this is the end of the recap, and here we have uh, a picture of some of the Jewish refugees moved to the Hankow district of Shanghai in World War II, which is a point of enormous pride of the Chinese people that they were basically the only people in the world who took in large numbers of Jewish refugees, which is another topic, the Evian conference and so forth. We're going to have a program. By we, I mean the San Diego Chinese Historical Museum in the fall of 2025. And we're going to coincide that with a talk, one of our weekend talks. And we're going to even have the director of the museum speak from China to us. And the date and the time are still unknown. We're going to try to avoid Saturday so that observant Jews can tune in. So it'll either be Saturday evening or Sunday. So watch for the day. It's going to be cool. And the whole program has been created and put on by the Shanghai Jewish Refugees Museum, which I went to when I went to China a few years ago. It's a very cool thing to do if you want. Let's have the first slide now of these individuals. And so here we have a guy named Sidney Rittenberg, who has lived to be almost 100. He was born in 1921 and died in 2019. And he was an aide to Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai. And his family, as you can see, there's a Sam Rittenberg Boulevard, which I think is his grandfather, in Charleston, South Carolina. And and he was the rebel of the family. He joined the Communist Party in 1940, the American Communist Party. He went to Stanford and studied Chinese, and then he was drafted into the U.S. Army. And so, in view of his studying Chinese, the Army sent him to China as a translator, and basically he stayed for decades in China. If we could have the next slide. He had quite the life. He had quite the life. He was married 3 times. His first wife and he got divorced when he left her to come to China, but his second and third wives were Chinese. And he was an advisor to, after he got out of the army, he stayed behind and was an advisor to all of the Chinese people who were running the country. As I mentioned, Mao Zedong and he uh, were friends. And he wrote in the Red Guards newspaper. He was jailed twice, what with the turbulent years in the 60s. He went to jail twice. He was exonerated. They apologized to him. And he ultimately left China, moved back to the United States, where the funniest thing happened. He had so many connections. He had so many connections in China that he created a business of advising American companies to deal with China. And he had over 100 large corporations that were uh, that had hired him. So he became this major capitalist, and even though he was a card-carrying communist. And he ultimately died in Arizona, but he had lived in the Pacific Northwest. His kids all moved to the United States. And to this day, a very interesting family. Next slide. Just to mention the family, if we could have the next slide, Muti. That we mentioned the boulevard. His father was president of the Charleston City Council, and lots of relatives are doctors to this day in the Charleston area and elsewhere. They've moved elsewhere throughout the South of the United States. So what I thought I would do, I would talk about a guy, totally shift gears and talk about a Dutch gentleman named Hank Sneevlet. And if we could have the next slide, please. And Hank uh, was a Dutch revolutionary, a socialist revolutionary, and a very interesting man. He grew up in Holland. He was a Dutch Jew, and from childhood, he was struck by the class differences in Holland, and he joined the Dutch Social Democratic Workers' Party around 1902. And he then became an organizer, a union organizer, and an organizer of what ultimately became became the Dutch Communist Party. He went to Indonesia to try to export communism to Indonesia, which was a Dutch colony at the time. And then after that, he went to China. And in China, he met with Sun Yat sen. And at first, he wanted to have the Communist Party, the fledgling Communist Party, be part of the Kuomintang, which was Chiang Kai shek and Sun Yat sen's party. And then later, that never worked out. and it broke free. He was sent there to China by the Communist Internationale, which was organized by Russia after the Russian Revolution. And the purpose of the Communist Internationale was to promote communism throughout the world. And so Lenin actually sent him to Asia to organize China. So if we could have the next slide, please. And so Lily Birmingham saw the slide and she was fascinated by the fact that Mr. Sneevlet was actually on the Chinese money for a period of time. But I have a surprise for her and somebody else coming up. As a founding member of the Chinese Communist Party, he advised initially trying to have them be part of the Kuomintang and then later on to break away. And then he was there for a number of years. And then he went back to Holland. And in Holland, he formed the Revolutionary Socialist Workers' Party. And then, unfortunately, after Germany invaded Netherlands in 1940, he was in the underground resistance and he was part of the famous dock workers strike of 1941, where basically the whole country was protesting the Nazis and the treatment of the Jews. And this was intensively repressed, and an informer turned him and his associates in 1942, and he was killed. And it's the interesting thing about Sneevlet is that he actually was an organizer of the Chinese Communist Party, the Indonesian Communist Party, and the Dutch Communist Party, all in one lifetime cut short. So he was a very vigorous worker, and he was a zealot, and but not the only zealot, as we'll see. There were other zealots. If we could have the next slide. I'm going to talk about what I just mentioned, which is the Communist Internationale, or Comintern as it's called, the International Communist Movement. That Soviet Russia formed the Comintern, and there was the first and the second and the third and revisions of the Comintern. And the purpose of the Comintern was to export communism throughout the world. And Chinese communism, we think of Mao Zedong uh, as the flag bearer, which he certainly was, and he was, as we mentioned, part of the Kuomintang before the Communist Party broke away in the 1920s, and then perhaps 1919, when the Versailles Conference high-handedly gave Shandong to Japan, and a lot of demonstrators then embraced communism because of that. And then the Comintern saw an opening in Asia, and they began exporting Bolsheviks who were often Jewish to China. And I already mentioned that they exported Hank Sneevlet, who in fact was not Russian, he was a Dutch Jew. But the exported a whole bunch to China to get the Communist Party of China off the ground. And so we're going to look at a few of these people, and I've chosen as another one to mention is Mikhail Borodin. And if we could have the next slide. Many of these people changed their names, and the Russians, and they did it because of the intense anti-Semitism present in Russia over hundreds of years. So he changed his name from Grusenberg. We're going to see one later on who changed his name from Stein, believe it or not. It's hard to believe. And he was sent in 1923 to Russia and by the Comintern. And he grew up in Russia, but strangely enough, went to college in Indiana. He went to Valparaiso University in Indiana, knew English very well. He was arrested. He joined the Bolshevik Party back in 1903, well before the Russian Revolution. And not only that, you're not going to believe this, but this one human being was sent by the Comintern to Scandinavia, to Mexico, to Spain, to Turkey, to Great Britain, and then to China in 1923. And he convinced Borodin, Dr. Sun, to allow the communists to join the KMT in 1923. And that was a very brief connection, as I say, broken very quickly by Chiang Kai-shek after Dr. Sun's death in 1925. And so Chiang Kai-shek turned against the communists, and then Borodin found that his influence had waned. He was another one who promoted the Chinese Communist Party. And so if we could have the next slide. And here's a picture of Borodin in the middle at a train station. And he went back to the Soviet Union. So these people who were sent by the Comintern intended not to stay because they saw their role in life as to spend their life going from place to place as revolutionaries, as I just mentioned. And so he then founded the English newspaper Moscow News and was deputy director of the TASS News Agency and deputy People's Commissar for Labor. Stalin, if you don't know much about Stalin in his period, he ruled by terror. He had a reign of terror where basically millions of Russians were killed, and he was pretty indiscriminate in who he attacked. And he would purge Jewish intellectuals. He'd purge towns and villages and areas, and it was um, nothing but terror. And Borodin basically disappeared in 1949, and then he was reported dead 2 years later in a labor camp. And it's really unclear exactly what happened. So that takes care of Mr. Borodin. Now we're going to talk about another firebrand who did not die by Stalin's purges and who has a very lovely headstone. If we could have the next slide, please. We're going to talk about Gregory Gershuni, who lived a short life. As you can see, he only lived to be 38, but he didn't die the way you think he died. He was a firebrand, and he was into assassinations and riots, and many in China found him too radical and too destructive. He was an anarchist. He was born in Lithuania, was trained as a pharmacist, but he quickly lost interest in that, and he founded the Workers' Party for Political Liberation in Russia. He's esteemed in Russia despite dying at a young age because of his views. In Manchuria, he was sentenced to life imprisonment for his anarchic views and his desire for assassination and riots and so forth. And he escaped in a sauerkraut barrel to China. But the Chinese radicals found him to be even too wild. And he escaped in 1906 and only lived 2 years later, 2 years longer. Let's have the next slide. And he died due to tuberculosis, not due to anything to do with his rabble rousing. And he died having traveled in those 2 years to San Francisco and throughout Europe. And he was endlessly campaigning for overthrowing the status quo and died in Switzerland. And then his grave is in Montparnasse Cemetery in Paris. Paris has these cemeteries that have all sorts of famous people. And here you have this beautiful bronze bust of Gershuni in the Montparnasse Cemetery. And if you're thinking you can go visit Jim Morrison at the same time. Jim is in a different cemetery. The guy who is head of the Doors and founded the Doors singing group is in Père Lachaise Cemetery in another part of Paris. So there you have Mr. Gershuni. The next one I wanted to mention is another man who changed his name, uh, and uh, and his name is Grigory um, Voitinsky. If we could have the next slide, please. And Voitinsky, his original name was Zarkin, and he changed his name from Grigory Zarkin to Grigory Voitinsky. And believe it or not, he died a natural death. So no tuberculosis. He died, I think, in the middle of an operation. And in the 1950s, it was dangerous, early days of antibiotics and so forth. So he was specifically sent uh, as well by the Russian Comintern in 1920 to China. And he was felt to be the chief architect of the Chinese Communist Party. And he uh, worked as a newspaper writer, reporter, but this was just a cover for his Bolshevik work. He left in 1920, and he met with Chinese writers and theoreticians, Chen Duxiu, and as I say, some people revere him as the chief architect of the Chinese Communist Party. So this is all due to the Russian Comintern and exporting of these revolutionaries, many of whom turned out to be Jewish. So if we could have the next slide. Couldn't find a lot of photos of Mr. Voitinsky. And so I found this with Chinese writing and Russian writing, but it's the same picture. And he actually set up a Comintern, Communist International China branch. And he would run into these other people. He knew Hank Snavelet when they were both in Russia in the 1920s. So they didn't stay, not because of any lack of love for China, but because they felt that their life was to be peripatetic revolutionaries to do what they could do around the world and so forth. So a combination of Chinese scholars and these agents of Holland and China and Russia and other parts of the world gave rise to what we now call the modern Chinese Communist Party. He went back to Russia, and then, as I mentioned, he was not killed by Stalin, but he died during an operation for unknown reasons in the 1950s. So that's uh, that's him. I thought I would talk about doctors. And since I'm a doctor, I thought it'd be an interesting topic to mention. Let's have another slide. Doctors tend to be altruistic people trying to heal the world. I know that's one of my personal passions, trying to uh, have guideline directed care spread around the world. And it's a lot harder than you think. You'd be surprised how hard it is. And so, and if you think about this, you'll think, he's right. Look at Doctors Without Borders, these doctors who go into dangerous parts of the world to treat the poor and the disadvantaged and the marginalized the world. Well, during the Spanish Civil War was in the 1930s, and it was an interesting war. It pitted Francisco Franco, the fascist, on one side, and a whole bunch of people on the other side, communists, socialists, uh, monarchists, Democrats, all sorts of people. And as you know, Franco won that war. So a lot of people who were anti-fascist would go to Spain, and it turns out a bunch of doctors went to Spain, and when the Spanish Civil War was over, some of them turned out to say, well, what else can I do to help the marginalized and disadvantaged and people wanting to overthrow old governments? And it turns out they actually went to China. So, and if we could have the next slide. So there he is. There's Jacob Rosenfeld. And Jacob Rosenfeld was a Austrian physician who was sent by uh, uh, by the Nazis to concentration camps, and he went to two different concentration camps. And at the end, they said to him, "We'll give you 2 weeks to get out of jail, or to get out of the country, or we're going to rearrest you." And so he went to Dr. Ho, the consul, the Chinese consul, who was giving out uh, all the letters of entry into China, and he came to Shanghai. And he originally was in the French concession, and then he joined the army. And he was the first non-Chinese in the new Fourth Army. and he became known in China as General Luo. And he did return to Austria in 1949, but during those times, he served the army uh, for all of that period. And uh, when he left in 1949, he attempted to get back uh, to uh, uh, to China, but it was in the middle of a turbulent period. There was the Korean War going on, and his visa was not approved. And he ultimately went to Israel, where he had some relatives. And so he went from Austria then to Israel, and he actually died in Israel. So, of the 20,000 plus Jews who escaped the Nazis, went to Shanghai, over 400 were doctors, turns out. And he was one of them. But instead of staying in that small neighborhood of Shanghai, he joined the Chinese army and worked for the Chinese army. And Lily Birmingham will be thrilled to hear, while he was not on any Chinese money, he did have a postage stamp with his face on it, and he did have a full-length sculpture of himself in his army uniform. And on top of that, there's a hospital in northern China named after him, the Jacob Rosenfeld Hospital. If we could have the next slide, please. So the next person I'm going to talk about is Richard Frey. So then it turns out, then, just to finish up with Jacob Rosenfeld, they didn't all stay in the ghetto in that part of Shanghai. Some of them went out and did other things in the rest of China, such as Rosenfeld, who joined the Chinese army. Richard Frey lived, as you can see from his tomb, he lived his life in China and died in China. And he lived in China for 65 years, and he joined the Communist Party as an Austrian young man at age 17. And so he became a doctor at a young age. The Nazis hunted him, and because of that, he also left for Shanghai in 1939. But again, he did not live in the Chinese Shanghai neighborhood, but he joined the 8th Route Army. And he taught medicine in a local area, in a local Chinese medical school, and then he was transferred to a base in the Shaanxi province. He produced a supply of crude penicillin, which apparently was effective. And then he did join the Chinese Communist Party himself and became a Chinese citizen in the 1950s. And there's a lovely bust of him at his tomb, which one can see. So there's a lot of vestiges of these people if you go look for them. And he, for reasons that are semi-mysterious, changed his name from Richard Stein to Richard Frey. Apparently, if we could have the next slide, uh, he apparently was talking to a Chinese person who said, Frey sounds like fry, which means free in German, and it's a cool last name. And so he said, sure, it makes sense. Sure, I'll just change it. So he changed his name and he became Richard Frey. And he spent his entire life dying in 2004. A number of these people just died recently, as you're going to see. Fighting first the Japanese aggression, and then the liberation of China, and then development of the People's Republic. And there's a photo of him treating a Chinese patient outside wearing his army uniform. So again, revered. Well, we've talked about doctors, and we've talked about people sent from by the Comintern, the Communist International, out of Russia, and but that's not all. There are other folks who found themselves going to China as well. On top of that, and I'm going to talk now about a journalist, and if we can have the next slide. So this woman was an Austrian woman, Ruth Weiss, and she lived also almost as long as the other gentleman, to about 98. And she spent her life in China. Um and she graduated from the University of Vienna and immediately moved to China in 1933. So this is just at the very beginning of Hitler coming to power, and Hitler had not gone into Austria until 1938 with the connection between uh, Germany and Austria called the Anschluss. And so but she left Austria in 1933 because of her beliefs, developed a Chinese name, and Wai Shun. And she had a number of jobs as a journalist, working for China Pictorial, China Welfare Fund, uh, and she became a citizen. And she worked in the House of Foreign Literature, and she became a citizen well back in 1955. Not easy for foreign people to do, to become citizens. And we've seen several of these people who actually became a citizen. And she also was a member of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, which was their top advisory body. And she was the foreign expert, speaking English, having a connection to Europe. And the interesting thing is, you can think of her, she was dying in just recently in 2006. She was a connection to the a European eyewitness to the birth of the People's Republic of China. A very interesting woman who enjoyed her time there. But she wasn't the only journalist. Journalists had a predilection for going to where the action is. I guess journalists, politicians, doctors wanting to go to where the action is. And we can go to another one. Let's look at the next slide, please. So this one is, and also you can see, uh-oh, he must have lived his life out as well in China, as did some of these others, since there you can see his bust in the Cemetery of Revolutionary Martyrs. Um, he was a Polish journalist, a Jewish journalist, who set up a Marxist study group. And he, as a journalist, interviewed a whole bunch of people. And interestingly, he died in combat. He died in combat with the Japanese in 1941, being the only international journalist to die in combat in China. And so, again, revered, again, a lovely sculpture, again, a lovely headstone. And so, this is, one could even imagine, one could organize a little tour of China and see these various places. Um, and we haven't even gotten to Harbin, that's coming up. So anyway, this is actually an interesting guy, dedicated people. The next person I'm going to talk about is a man named Israel Epstein, and he was a journalist who died at age 90, and he also became a citizen. And his parents, though, he has a different story. See, everyone has their own story. Uh, uh, Ruth Weiss had this burning desire and goes there as soon as she can in 1933 when she was still in her 20s. Israel Epstein was not born in China, but at age 2, he came to China with his mom and dad. Uh, and so that would be 1917. And it's unknown exactly why his parents left uh, Europe, but possibly escaping political turmoil there. But in any event, he became a journalist and speaking English and German and Chinese. He became a journalist for an English language newspaper in northern China. He joined the Chinese Defense League, and he became a zealot. And his idea was to uh, propagate Chinese communism as much as he's able to around the world. And so, uh, so He did that, and he also had the interesting, unique honor in September 1944 to help the Xinhua news agency send its first English dispatch to the world from a cave in the Qingling Mountains, I think where Mao was in a cave. And he was editor in chief of China Today until he was 70. And he again had Chinese citizenship and was member of the Chinese Communist Party and was buried in the funeral in the cemetery for revolutionaries. So it's an interesting thing. He lived in Harbin for a period of time. And when I mentioned this to Lily Chang, our chairman of the board, she said, "Why don't you have a word or two about Harbin?" And so I thought I would. And you may know of Harbin if you're not familiar with China because of their Winter Ice Festival. If we could have the next slide. And in the lower right, you can see their ice festival. And it's pretty darn cold in the winter in Harbin. And so they have this beautiful ice festival that they light up. And it's apparently quite the sight. I hope global warming uh, doesn't scuttle this. It would be a shame if that were the case. But Harbin is a city in the northernmost part of China, not far from Russia, not far from Korea, not far from Japan. And China in 1895 gave Russia a land concession in Harbin to develop the area and to develop a railway. And Russia, in turn, gave minorities, Jews, other people benefits to move there. So then Jews trying to escape poverty and anti-Semitism thought it made a lot of sense. And thousands of Jews moved to Harbin. And so they created synagogues. And in the upper right is the old synagogue in Harbin. The new synagogue still exists, which has been turned into, I think, a hall. It's no longer used as a synagogue. Well, as you're going to hear, virtually all the Jews have left. And then Jews owned a variety of businesses, built synagogues, this and that. And then after World War I, the Jewish population got larger and larger. But when the Japanese conquered Manchuria, Harbin is in Manchuria. They were trying to mimic the Germans, and so they created anti-Semitic laws. And with that, a lot of the Jews left, and so they left for different parts of the world. Some back to Russia, some to other parts of the world. When the war ended, and when World War II ended, Russia then repatriated um, repatriated uh, the many of the Jews back to Russia, not necessarily to their happiness because they were sent to gulags. And we think that the last known Jew died there in the 1980s from the original group. There may be Jews who've more modern days, moved there. And some of the architecture and synagogues, as I mentioned, have been preserved. So Harbin would be an interesting place for review. And so we did mention in Shanghai the uh, the Shanghai Jewish Refugee Museum, which continues to exist. And these are the people who are sponsoring our fall 2025 talk. And we're going to have a talk from these people, and B, we're going to have artifacts from the ghetto in this neighborhood in Shanghai at the San Diego Chinese Historical Museum with a several month run for people to see. I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be a lot of fun. So if we can move on from Harbin, I want to mention Sidney Shapiro, which is one of the funnier stories in the sense that he appeared to have no particular interest in China growing up, and he wanted to go into the army, and he signed up to go to a French language school. And the army being the army, I mean, trust me, I have personal experience with this, sent him to Chinese language school. Actually, when I entered the armed forces, they gave the doctors a choice, and so you could pick whatever branch of the armed forces you wanted to be in. So I picked Air Force number one, Navy number two, and Army number three. So as you'd imagine, they sent me into the Army. So they sent him to a Chinese language school. Turns out he loved it. He loved the Chinese language school, and he actually loved it so much that he became an attorney in New York and worked for a large law firm in New York. But he left it in the 1940s to go to Shanghai to improve his Chinese, where he married a Chinese woman and they lived their lives out in China. And he died in China. And it turns out he did improve his Chinese skills and became a translator. And he translated a number of Chinese works into English, including Outlaws of the Marsh, The Family by Bajin. He became a Chinese citizen. He called himself a middle of the road communist. I don't know what he meant by that. Maybe he wasn't as much of a zealot as some of these people who left Russia. And since he was a white man who spoke Chinese well, and he was apparently handsome looking, he was an actor in a bunch of Chinese movies playing American gangsters. And generally, that was his stereotypical role that he would play. That was his side gig. And then he lived to be 98 and died in Beijing. So at this point, what I thought I would do is I would summarize. I'd have a final slide, and uh, and to say that in my readings with Mr. Marshall, the minister from Singapore, being the original person to spur me to look into this, I find that there are all sorts of people of the Jewish faith who went to China over the years, some, as we know, to escape Hitler into Shanghai, some to foment revolution, to advance the communist cause, some as doctors, some as translators, some as journalists. And I found this to be a remarkable little journey in my writings. And the next chapter, we have a couple more chapters on this coming up. And the one that I'm sure of is the one in the fall of 2025, when we're going to have the exhibit uh, from Shanghai. So I want to thank everybody for listening, and then I want to uh, I want to have this conclude, and I think we'll have Lily chat.
Thank you, Bob. That this is really a wonderful presentation. First of all, I told you I'm so impressed by somebody who is on the Chinese currency. Now you told me somebody else is on the stamp. These people were well respected by the Chinese people. So it's really amazing how Jewish people contributed to the early modern China, especially the Communist Party. And just from what you have told us, I get the impression these people, especially the communists, they were just energetic people, very passionate about communism. I think they had really high hope how communism would change the world. And anyway, that I guess that's the situation during the early 20th century. So with the Communist Party story, I wanted to say a little more about how the Chinese Communist Party was founded. So Chinese Communist Party, abbreviation is CCP. During the early 20th century, the Russian October Revolution and Marxist theory inspired the founding of the CCP. And a Chinese person named Chen Duxiu was the first Chinese who publicly supported Leninism and the world revolution. They regarded the October Revolution in Russia as groundbreaking and probably believed it would start a new era for the oppressed countries. And I think that's why people were so enthusiastic about it, had high hope. So in 1921, Chen Duxiu and others led the founding of the CCP with the help from the Russian Communist Party or Bolsheviks and the Communist International. Bob mentioned several times this Comintern. So they got help from outside to form this CCP. For the first 6 years, the CCP aligned with the KMT, the Kuomintang, as Bob mentioned. So they became the left wing of this larger nationalist movement. So CCP was actually founded on July 23rd, 1921, which was the first day of the first National Congress of the CCP. And this Congress was held for over a week with only 50 members at this time, which included Mao Zedong. And the CCP organization grew quickly after this initial Congress. However, it was interesting, while the first CCP Congress was held in a house in the Shanghai French concession, the French police interrupted them on July 30th. So they had to move away. So they went to a tourist boat in Zhejiang and trying to continue. And only a dozen delegates attended after Shanghai. However, they still finished their meeting. The resolution of the Congress called for an established Communist Party as a branch of the Communist International, this Comintern. And they elected this person I mentioned earlier, Chen Duxiu, as the leader. He served as the first general secretary of the CCP and was considered as China's Lenin. So at this time, Mao Zedong was still a lower ranked member. The Soviets hoped to foster pro-Soviet forces in East Asia to fight against Japan. So they contacted Kuomintang, or KMT, which was leading the Chinese government in Guangdong at the time. As Bob mentioned, Mikhail Borodin from the Communist International went to Guangdong or Guangzhou in 1923. So after that, the Soviets established very friendly relationships with the KMT. So at this time, the Central Committee of the CCP, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, and the Communist International all hoped that CCP would eventually control the KMT. At the time, KMT leader Sun Yat-sen eased the conflict between the communists and their opponents. But by the time Sun Yat-sen died in 1925, things changed. At this time, there were almost 2,500 CCP members, so they grew from 50 to 2,500 very fast in 4 years. And so the communists dominated the left wing of the KMT, and they struggled for power with the party's right wing. And after Sun Yat-sen died, Chiang Kai-shek became the right-wing leader. Chiang Kai-shek was not actively anti-communist at that time, even though he hated the theory of class struggle and the CCP's seizure of power. However, the communists proposed removing Chiang Kai-shek's power. So Jiang's initiated moves to marginalize the position of the communists, and things got ugly. Then Jiang started to kill communist members. The war between the two parties started, and that was 1927. And it would continue to play out during and after World War II. As most of you know that in 1949, CCP took over the Chinese government and Chiang Kai-shek and the KMT exiled to China. to Taiwan. So that's sort of the story of the early CCP. And I found it interesting. I didn't really know until Bob had his presentation, and I kind of looked up and found these stories. But now I want to go back to Bob's presentation about Jewish people who helped founding the CCP and the modern China post-imperialism. And we think there is a similarity between the United States post 776 revolution. So it's all about a country having a new government, trying to start with a new start. So, Bob, I know you have some more to talk about this similarity between the two countries.
Yes, I do. Lily and I were talking about this, and we're going to try to. By the way, you folks who have written questions in the chat, Elizabeth is looking at them, and I noticed that Esther is here and Stephen is here from, I guess, from still in Germany, and which is in the evening now. So we thank everybody for coming. But we were chatting about that, and we were saying, well, roughly parallel. And then the more we were thinking about it, the more we were thinking that it's exactly parallel. That in 1776, it wasn't exactly a new country. It was the old country. There were states, Pennsylvania. William Penn had moved there in the 1600s. Maryland was founded by the British in honor of the Catholic Queen Henrietta Maria, uh, and became a Catholic colony in the 1600s. So what happened in 1776 was we got rid of King George, developed democracy, changed the name of the country, the language, the people were the same. So the parallel was the same, and it was exciting around the world. This new fresh government. And so if we get up the next slide after this one, Muting. So look at this. These are 5 people. What do they have in common? They were all foreign people who came to the United States. And why did they come? They came mostly because of excitement about the idea of the new country. And let's have the next slide. So Chaim Salomon, believe it or not, another Jewish person coming to a foreign country to make his mark. And he was the major financier of the Continental Congress and the Revolutionary War. And George Washington called him up on his iPhone and asked him to about needed money for the siege of Yorktown. And interestingly, Chaim Salomon lived his life out in the New World and died in Philadelphia and is buried in Philadelphia. And you can see his grave. And he died broke because he gave every penny he had to the new country, and the new country was never able to repay him for his loans. And if we could have the next slide. And here we have Lafayette, Pulaski, and Ceausescu. These are all people who fought in the Continental Army. And there are over 30 towns in the United States that are either named Lafayette or Fayetteville, all named after Lafayette. There's a college in Pennsylvania named Lafayette College, streets and parks. And most of these people went back to their country of origin. Lafayette died in Paris. He was a French nobleman. Ceausescu died in Switzerland after leaving Poland for the United States and fighting as a colonel in the Continental Army. Pulaski was that guy with the mustache in that first slide, who unfortunately died in battle in Georgia and is buried in Savannah, Georgia, with a monument in his honor. And the Pulaski Skyway, if anyone's ever taken the New Jersey Turnpike to New York, connects Newark to the Holland Tunnel. It's named after him. And so let's have the next slide. And then the idea of writing about the New World and so forth. Alexis de Tocqueville is a Frenchman who had a lot of hats, wore a lot of hats, diplomat, um, aristocrat, sociologist, politician. And he came to America and traveled in America and wrote these very popular books, 2 volumes called Democracy in America over 5 years. And it was about what he thought was so exciting about America. So the bottom line is the parallels are shocking about these people coming to China and the people coming to America. So there you go. So back to us, Lily. So I think this is sort of interesting. I think people would
I
hopefully agree.
I think so. It's a I think whenever there's something new, people have hope and they felt like they could contribute. So they come and they all want to contribute. And I think that's really an exciting thing to happen. So do we have questions from people?
I see Esther's hand up.
Correct.
Esther, take yourself off mute, and we're happy to hear from you if you'd like to say hello.
Hi, everyone. Start my, can I, okay, start my video? Yeah.
You're there.
Hi. First of all, I want to tell you that this research was amazing. You are terrific, all of it that you presented here today. And I doubt that my own family, my father's family was there from the 1840s, even knew all this that you've just told us. And I was too young, of course, to know it. First of all, my father's family came on the steamships. He was a ship's captain from India, traveling back and forth. So he was part of that Sassoon and Kadoorie based beginnings in Shanghai and China. As far as the refugees are concerned, there's very little, I see that a lot of people don't actually know much about that. Shanghai took in more refugees combined than any other country combined. They took in many, many more. And the Sephardi Jews who were there first were the people who actually helped the refugees initially. But then they had to call a halt to it because Shanghai couldn't take any more because it was just overburdened food-wise and financially and in every way. I was never part of the refugees because I was interned as a British citizen in a British camp, in a Japanese internment camp, which you know, Bob, you know that. But I really am so impressed with this. I love it. Actually, I'd like to watch it again because there's a lot of information here that I didn't know. And sometimes people alluded to it, but was never really fully expanded on the way that you've done. So I can see how much effort you put into getting together, both of you, all this incredible information. Thank you.
Well, Esther, it's always fun hearing from you. And Elizabeth, do we have other questions? I think Stephen Less has a comment, who was the gentleman who chatted about his dad's paintings as a young refugee in Shanghai.
Right. I see Stephen's comment in the chat box. I wonder if Stephen would like to turn on his microphone and camera. And I guess address or engage with everyone. Maybe. Okay, I see that your microphone is on. If you could start your video.
There he is.
Hi, Bob. Very nice job. I just wanted to congratulate you on the presentation and ask one question and respond to Esther, who I also say hello to. Where did you get the number from that you used?
Oh, well, I read a whole bunch of articles.
You said 23,000. The Shanghai Jewish Refugees Museum itself has revised what it said in the past and mentions 20,000. And I just wanted to point out that most Western historians are not talking about 17 to 20,000 roughly. But the connected question is, you also said that the Chinese rescued these people. Jewish refugees who fled Nazi Germany, of course. That is a debatable standpoint because the Chinese had no say under the Japanese occupation of the city as to who was coming in. That's my comment. I just I could not resist. Thanks.
No, thank you for your comments, Stephen. I'm so glad you're here. And it's very nice to talk to you again. The answer about the 23,000, I have to say, I looked at a whole bunch of sources about all sorts of things, and I found the 23,000 in one of my sources. And since it was an odd number, I thought it might be more precise than the 20,000, although it may certainly be incorrect. And if we bring this up again, when we have our talk in the fall, and we actually have the gentleman from the Shanghai Jewish Refugee Museum talk, we'll get a much more precise answer. I think that you're not wrong about how the Japanese were controlling and so forth during World War II. I think, and other people talk about how, I think Esther is the one who mentioned that the Chinese took in far more people than anybody else in the world. The Evian Conference was this very interesting conference in 1938 that was sponsored by FDR, and nobody is sure why he did it. And he had dozens of countries invited in Evian, France, where they have the mineral water, and interestingly, China was not invited. China was not a participant, and nobody voiced desire to take in a lot of refugees at that conference, except maybe Dominican Republic and Costa Rica. But beyond that, it was nobody. And so Hitler then said, "Look, see, you guys aren't interested either, and so don't blame me." And so it was an interesting little chapter. And then China was accepted these people, however many, 17 to 20,000. Anyway, thank you, Stephen. Esther, did you have your hand up again?
Yes, I did. Just looking at the chat there. The reason why Shanghai was able to take in all those people was because there was no visa requirement. And so a lot of the refugees who were saved by Senpo Sugihara and Feng Shangho were because they had to have a place that they could go to prove that they could get out of Europe. And so Shanghai was the only place that had a no visa requirement and anyone could end up there. So the first people went to Japan, thanks to Senpo Sugihara. And a lot of them stayed there a long time before they actually went to Shanghai. So I don't know if that's common knowledge. And I think that also Xu Xin would be a great source. He happens to be a very good friend of mine, of the numbers. And the other professor who ran the Shanghai Department of Jewish Affairs, who's retired, I can't remember his name offhand. But Xu Xin would be able to give you that information as well. Not that it's important, honestly, between 20 and 23,000, it's hard to say that would be an important thing.
Well, thank you, Esther. Elizabeth, are there other comments, questions?
I mean, there are a fair number of comments. What I'm detecting, so there was a question from Cindy Thompson concerning how Japanese occupiers treated Jewish people who came to Shanghai to escape the Nazis during World War II. I think there was there were a number of replies in the chat box. I don't know if that's interesting to chime in on, or if Su Fan Chung. I also see that a person named Lily Klebanoff, Lily Klebanoff Blake chimed in on that one as well.
Elizabeth, if you could find some comments or questions regarding the talk at hand, which is not. We're more than happy to talk about the Shanghai chapter in 1940s. But if we could have stuff about the talk at hand, we are going to be having that in the fall of 25.
Yeah,
But if
the exhibition, I just want to mention the exhibition was originally curated by the Shanghai Jewish Refugee Museums, and it was on display in New York over a year ago. So I contacted them, and they agreed to give us all the digital files they have. So we will actually use their curated exhibition. And I think whatever numbers they use, I would trust that number.
Of course. Lily, what are the dates, by the way? We may as well plug it right now. What are the dates of this exhibit from the
It will be September next year, September 2025 to the end of March 2026. So it'll
oh,
be like
wonderful. So
early
6 months.
September 2025.
Well, that's
That's
great. So
when
there'll
the
be
yeah.
plenty of time for people to visit San Diego and to see the exhibit. That's
Uh,
wonderful.
yes, and I'm just so happy that they are willing to give us what they curated, and I think there will be a lot of information and a lot of things we're curious about, and I think they have the official saying about what happened in Shanghai because they are there right now.
Of course.
And we, as Bob mentioned, we will also collect local people's memorabilia or any items associated with the time people were in Shanghai during that time, and that would complement the exhibition. So if people have items that can loan to us, we would really appreciate it.
I'll
Well,
give you this.
we'll take good care of it all.
I'll give you this.
Oh,
Cool.
that's Esther's book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
good.
And
Okay.
it does cover all of the information. I'd like this to be in your exhibition, actually.
Oh,
Cool.
I have
Yes. Wonderful.
I have
It's
a
in
copy of it.
Northridge. My book is in Northridge together with information. But definitely, I'll give you a book to put in there if you don't have one. Definitely.
Great. Thank you.
Elizabeth, are there other questions?
So most of the questions seem more kind of, they're loosely related to the subject, not specifically addressing the talk. Would you like for me to read those questions or?
Whatever you'd like, go right ahead.
Sure.
I know I'm interrupting, but this is Lily Klebanoff Blake. I don't know how to ask a question, but I just wanted to make a comment. Would that be all right?
That's
Go right
fine.
ahead.
Okay. Can you see me now? Oh, yeah, I just turn on my camera. I don't know if my camera is on or not. I think it should be.
You're
Oh,
good.
yeah,
It
you're right.
is.
Hi,
What
Esther.
would
Good
you
to
like
see
to say, Lily?
you. Well, I wanted to say that the exhibit in New York was really excellent. The Refugee Museum did a wonderful, wonderful job. And that I am part of this Russian Jewish community that was also very responsible for taking care of the people in the ghetto. And as Esther mentioned, she and her family, who were Sephardic Jews, were placed in camps. The Russian Jews were not. So it was only the Russian Jews who were not in the ghetto who were able to take care of the people in the ghetto. And my family, I'm the third generation of my family to have lived in China. My family comes from Harbin.
Mm.
When did your family arrive in Harbin?
1900 and 1904.
Yeah, so exactly when Russia took it over and exactly when Russia gave those concessions to people who wanted to move there. So it's exactly your family then fits right in with what I had mentioned in my talk.
And I'm sorry, but I missed the beginning of your talk. So if you mentioned that, I apologize.
That's okay. And so anyway, happy to have you, Lily. And
Thank
so
you.
very good. Are there other questions, Elizabeth?
Okay, so we had a comment from Jason Su. In the 1940s Shanghai under Japanese occupation, his mother, I guess the family of his mother, befriended a young refugee violinist from Berlin, Bernard Goldschmidt. That in this, I guess Uncle Bernie, as I guess Jason knows him, kept very meticulous records and photographs. He says that he left for the United States before 1949, joined the United States Air Force, and became the first violinist at the Cleveland Symphony Orchestra. I don't know if Jason is interested in speaking a little bit about this family history.
Yeah, would you please tell me the name of the violinist again? You're going to laugh why I'm asking you this.
It's okay. Bernard Goldschmidt.
The reason I'm asking is because my son-in-law's father was first violinist at the Cleveland Symphony Orchestra at one point, Arnold Steinhardt.
Okay.
So I wonder if they know each other.
I don't.
Arnold then left that to start a string quartet that he was in for 45 years.
I don't see that Jason has turned on his microphone or his
Yeah.
camera.
Hi, this is Jason. I'm just gonna respond to Dr. Stein's. Uncle Bernie was first violinist under von Dohnanyi when von Dohnanyi was the director. That was in the 80s. So they must have, yeah.
My Arnold was in the 60s.
Yeah, so they must be after that. Yeah, it was just an interesting story. And Uncle Bernie's daughter, Rhoda, is a OBGYN in Cleveland. And she still has very detailed records of all the photographs, because Uncle Bernie took a camera with him. So he took all the pictures of him coming to Shanghai. He has all the programs they performed at all the Shanghai synagogues. So I can talk to Rhoda. Maybe she can connect with your museum to see if any of her father's stuff might be interesting to you guys.
Yes, I think actual photographs will be very interesting, and any objects related to that period of time will all be interesting for us to show.
Well,
So
she
Jason,
did.
if you could be nice enough,
Yeah.
nice enough to leave your email with us, we might want to get in contact with you regarding some artifacts that we might have for our fall 2025 exhibit.
Yeah, no problem. I think Lily, you have my email. I will connect you and also Lily Chen afterwards.
That'd be great.
Yeah,
Actually, I'm the curator, so I need the information.
Okay,
Yeah,
no problem.
Lily is the brains of the outfit for this exhibit.
No problem.
What else do you need? What else are you looking for?
What do you have, Esther? Would you have any artifacts from
Actually,
your childhood?
I've got tons because I give talks all the time about it. So I've got a full collection.
Well, we would take good care of it.
Can we visit you and see what you have, or you give us pictures of what you have? Well, any three-dimensional items will be more interesting than paper.
I'm in Los Angeles, and I'll come to your exhibition as well. I would even speak if you want me to. But I've got tons of photographs of my family in Shanghai and them with the Chinese staff of my father's company as well. And yeah.
I think photographs are interesting, but I'm more interested. I mean, we need to collect photographs, but we also like to have three-dimensional items. For instance, this one lady brought a small arquebus with her when she left Shanghai. So it was her little souvenir from Shanghai. And that would be an actual object. So anything that's an actual object.
I have to think if I have any, because I left Israel and my family had everything there. And my mum's passed away now, so it's all in Israel. And I don't know that I'll be able to get any of it. I have to think about what I've got. And if I have it, I will let you have it, sure.
Well, if we could, Lily, if we could get a painting or two by Stephen Less's dad, that would be wonderful. He did all of those sketches both while he was in Shanghai and also later on from memory years later. So
that would be great.
That would be a wonderful thing as well.
Yes.
This has been a fun talk this morning, and it's one that is so resonates with people about new countries and escaping injustice and things of that nature, and it's all surprising as well. And I hope people enjoyed it.
Loved it.
Yeah, Elizabeth, is there anything else you see that you'd like to bring to our attention?
I mean, there were a number of, for example, there's a question from Lydia saying, but it goes off on kind of a different thread.
Well, if we're able to answer it, that we'd be okay with that. But if there's something, I'd prefer stuff that would be regarding today's topic. I understand about the different threads. I mean, one's brain starts to run, and one starts to think of other side issues.
I think it's an interesting question, Bob. I think if we have enough time, it can be our last question of the day.
Oh, let's hear it then. Let's hear it. See if one of us can answer it.
Right. Lydia asks, could you speak a little bit about what impact if any, that the Jewish community had on areas in China where they were living during the war. And I think here she's thinking specifically of medical practices.
Oh, well, to our surprise, we find that certain doctors actually joined the Chinese army and worked to promote health as members of the Chinese army, which was, I think, very surprising. And people who specifically came to Shanghai via the same route the other European Jews went to, but yet instead of staying in the ghetto, joined the army. I found that to be a major surprise. And regarding affecting the areas, many of them have left. The Shanghai community basically has been dispersed throughout the world in the late 1940s and early 1950s, with the Russians leaving as late as 1957, 1958. And then in Harbin, apparently, there are a variety of architectural remnants that one can see if one goes to Harbin. So I think that would be sort of a cool trip.
Well, wonderful. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We are about out of time here. So we thank everyone for coming, and we look forward to seeing you all again at our next TCAEMB, and specifically our upcoming lectures on the Jews in China. If everyone, we hope that everyone has a wonderful rest of your weekend, and if the principals can stay on, we would be grateful.
We'll just
And
have the principals stay on for 5 minutes, okay?
thank
And
you so much.
everybody else, bye-bye. Have a good rest of the year. See you guys in 2025.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Let me go. Bye-bye and thank you.
Bye-bye, Esther.
Thank you.
Always fun seeing you.
Bye-bye.
Oh, just 3. Okay.
What's up?
So we're deleting people one by one, putting them into the waiting room area.
No.
Deleted. People are just sent to the waiting room.
Yeah.
Waiting.
Okay. Okay.
Oh,
No, it's
first,
only 6 of us.
yeah, first of all, I want to thank